My girlfriend said, "I hope you're sterile so I never have a child of yours." She humiliated me in front of our friends, but I made her regret it. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. When our relationship started, neither of us was seriously thinking about getting married or having kids. We were young, we had our own projects, and we preferred to focus on building a life together before thinking about starting a family. Still, from the beginning, there was something I was always clear about with Lydia. She wanted to be a mother someday. It wasn't a recent idea. Ever since I met her, she spoke of motherhood as one of her great dreams. If she saw a family with small children, she'd comment that she wanted to experience something similar one day. If a friend announced she was pregnant, Lydia would get excited and want to know all the details. On more than one occasion, she had even told me, "I've always wanted to have kids." I never had a problem with that. In fact, I also wanted to have kids someday. The difference was that Lydia always clarified that she wasn't ready yet. When someone asked us when we would have kids, she'd reply that she was in no hurry. "I want to be a mom, but not yet. First, I want to enjoy a few more years of our life." I completely agreed. We had jobs, expenses, trips we wanted to take, and many things we were still trying to build. I had never thought we should have a child immediately just because we had been together for several years. Even when we talked about the future, Lydia used to put a considerable distance between those plans and our present. Once, we were buying furniture for the apartment and saw a small room that could become an office. I joked, saying, "A crib could go here someday." She immediately replied, "Someday, but don't start planning it yet." We both laughed. It was like that with practically everything. When we talked about names, for example, she could spend several minutes telling me which one she liked, but then she'd end by saying that it would probably be many years before we had to make that decision. She even had a list of names on her phone. Sometimes she'd show it to me. "Look, these are the ones I like for a girl." I'd review the list and make comments. "Not this one." "Why?" "Because it sounds like the name of a person who's always angry." She'd laugh and delete one from the list just to annoy me. I never imagined that one of those conversations would end up turning into something completely different. The situation occurred during a gathering with several friends. It was a Saturday night, and we had planned to meet at the home of a couple we had known for a few years. There were 8 of us in total. They had prepared food, there were drinks and background music, but it wasn't a big party. It was simply one of those gatherings where everyone ends up sitting around a table talking for hours. Lydia was in a very good mood that night. She had been telling stories from work, making jokes, and talking with several of the girls who were there. I was sitting next to her. After dinner, the conversation began to shift from one topic to another until one of the girls mentioned that her sister was pregnant. That led us to talk about children. One of the guys said he had never wanted to have kids. His girlfriend immediately contradicted him. "That's what you say now. In 5 years, you'll be begging me to have one." Everyone started laughing. Another friend said he had already decided on the name for his future son. "If I have a boy, he'll be named Mateo." His partner said she didn't agree, and a completely absurd argument about names began. In a matter of minutes, we were all saying what names we liked. Lydia participated quite a bit in the conversation. She said she liked several names for a girl and had 2 favorites for a boy. "Although it's still a long way off," she clarified. "I don't want kids for now." One of the girls asked her, "But you always say you want to be a mom?" "Yes, of course I do," Lydia replied. "It's one of my dreams, but it's one thing to want to be a mom and another very different thing to be ready for it." I thought it was a very sensible answer. Then one of our friends asked me, "And you, Alejandro, have you ever thought about names?" There were a couple of names I had always liked. I looked at Lydia before answering. She was looking at me with curiosity. Then I smiled and said, "Yes, if we have a boy someday, I'd like him to be named Raul in honor of my grandfather." Several people reacted positively. "That's a good name," someone said. I nodded. Then I added, "And if it's a girl, I'd like her to be named Lydia, like you, love." I said it completely naturally. I wasn't trying to make a public statement or put her in an uncomfortable situation. It just seemed nice to say. My grandfather Raul had meant a lot to me, and I had always thought it would be a good way to keep his memory alive. And naming a daughter Lydia seemed like an even more personal way to do it. I expected my girlfriend to smile, maybe to say something like, "How nice." Instead, Lydia burst out laughing. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a loud, mocking laugh. She leaned back slightly as she laughed and looked at me as if I had just said the most ridiculous thing of the night. What? I asked, still smiling because I thought she was joking. Lydia covered her mouth for a second while trying to contain her laughter. No, I can't believe you said that. The others started to look at us. What's wrong with it? I asked. She laughed again. You're incredible. I thought she was about to make a joke about the name, but then she pointed her finger at me and with a clearly mocking smile said, I hope you're sterile so I never have a child of yours. Her tone was so carefree that for the first second, no one reacted. I just stared at her. The smile vanished from my face. Lydia, on the other hand, continued to smile. She even let out another little laugh, as if she had made a witty comment. What? She said, noticing that everyone was silent. I'm kidding. But no one laughed. One of the guys slowly put the glass he was holding on the table. The girl across from us opened her eyes slightly and looked first at Lydia and then at me. Another friend froze completely. I could see in their faces that none of them knew how to react. I didn't know what to say either. It hadn't been an argument. We weren't fighting. I had simply said that if we had children someday, I would like to name a girl after her. And she had responded by wishing I were sterile, so I would never have a child with her. What bewildered me the most was her expression. She didn't seem sorry. She still had that mocking smile on her face, as if she were waiting for someone to finally laugh at her comment. But no one did. The silence became awkward. Lydia looked around the table. For the first time, she seemed to realize she had crossed a line, though she didn't seem to understand exactly which one. I remained seated next to her, not knowing what to do. And for a few seconds, the 8 of us at that table just sat in silence, trying to process what Lydia had just said. I kept looking at Lydia, hoping that at some point she would understand the gravity of what she had just said and apologize, but she didn't. Instead, she shrugged again. Look, the thing is, you're honestly not that good looking, she said with a calmness that surprised me even more. And I feel like my kids would turn out ugly. Some people looked down. I felt my face start to burn. Lydia continued talking, as if she were explaining something completely logical. But well, I love you, so I don't want to break up with you. I guess I'll just have to put up with it. The phrase caused an even more awkward silence. I couldn't believe she was talking about me that way in front of our friends. One of the friends sitting across from us finally intervened. I think you should shut your mouth. You're only making it worse. Lydia looked at her with a surprised expression. Why? I'm telling the truth. You're being cruel, the girl replied. Lydia let out a small laugh. Oh, don't play the saint. Your boyfriend is ugly too. I don't think you want to have a child with that guy. The friend's expression changed immediately. Her boyfriend was sitting next to her and seemed as surprised as the rest of us. Excuse me, she asked. I'm just saying you shouldn't judge me. Your boyfriend isn't exactly a model either. She shook her head. I love my boyfriend. Her voice no longer had the joking tone from a few minutes before. And to me, he's beautiful. He's handsome. I love how he looks, and yes, I would love to have a child with him someday. If you don't love yours, don't think we're all the same as you. Lydia made a face. Yes, I do love him. Well, it doesn't seem like it. Lydia looked at me again. I just have eyes to see that he's ugly. That left me completely bewildered. I didn't know what to say, but she wasn't finished yet. In fact, I've even thought we could do something else. Everyone looked at her. What thing? Someone asked. Lydia replied with absolute naturalness. Get a sperm donor. That way I could have a child with good genes and raise him with my boyfriend. I felt a kind of emptiness in my stomach. For a few seconds, I didn't even understand what she had said. I looked around the table. No one was talking. The friend who had tried to stop her seemed indignant. That girl's boyfriend had his jaw clenched. I finally reacted. What the underscore are you saying? Lydia looked at me. Alejandro, no. What did you just say? That it was a possibility. A possibility? My voice started to rise. Have you really thought about having a child with another man's sperm because you think I'm ugly? She crossed her arms. I'm sorry, but she didn't seem genuinely sorry. The truth hurts, doesn't it? That sentence was what finally broke something inside me. Until that moment, I had tried to stay calm. I had tried to think that maybe she was making bad jokes, that maybe she had had too much to drink, or that she simply wasn't measuring her words. But that last sentence made me realize that she knew perfectly well what she was doing. And then I remembered something that the others probably didn't know. Lydia hadn't always looked the way she did now. When I met her, she was physically very different. I'm not saying that as an insult. In fact, when I started dating her, I never thought she was an unattractive person. I liked her smile, her way of talking, and the way she behaved with me. But over the years, she had changed a lot. Envy. She had undergone several surgeries and cosmetic procedures. First it was her nose, then she had a procedure on her lips, later she had liposculpture, and finally a chin lipo. I never had a problem with any of those decisions. She worked at a company where she earned quite a bit, and had been able to pay for those procedures with her own money. I even accompanied her to some consultations, and was with her during her recovery. I never held it against her. On the contrary, I always told her that if it made her feel better about herself, I would support her. The problem was that after all those changes, Lydia began to act as if her current appearance was completely natural and as if she had always been that way. She had also deleted practically all her old photographs from her social media. When I met her, she had many old posts, photographs with friends, family photos, and some pictures of her during college. Over time, she started deleting them. She said she didn't like them. Then she changed her profile pictures. She deleted albums. She even went so far as to ask me not to post certain photographs because she said she didn't want them to appear on the internet. I never insisted. It was her decision. But at that moment, after hearing her talk about my genes and say that she wanted to use another man's sperm to have children with better features, something changed. I looked at her directly. You know what's the most absurd thing about all of this? Lydia stopped smiling. What? That you talk about genetics as if you were exactly the same as you are now. She frowned. What do you mean? It seems you've forgotten what you were like when I met you. Lydia's expression changed immediately. Alejandro, don't start. Why not? Because it has nothing to do with it. Of course it has to do with it. I stood up. Everyone looked at me. You want to talk about genes? Perfect. Let's talk about that. Lydia shook her head. I don't want to discuss this here. You decided to talk about my appearance in front of everyone. She remained silent. You said my children would be ugly. You said you needed another man's sperm. You said you're with me even though you have to put up with my appearance. I took a deep breath. And now it turns out we're going to pretend we can't talk about the things you yourself have decided to mention? Lydia started to get nervous. I've never said I'm ashamed of how I used to be. I didn't say you were ashamed. I looked at her intently. But you deleted all your old photographs. Because I didn't like them. Exactly. I continued speaking. You had a nose job. She remained silent. You had your lips done. Her face began to change. You had liposculpture. Shut up. You also had a chin lipo. Alejandro, shut up. Her voice broke, but I was already too angry. I wasn't trying to make fun of her appearance. I had never used her procedures to attack her. That's precisely why it hurts so much to hear her talk about me that way. I was with you through all of that. I never made you feel bad about how you were before. I never told you that you needed to change for me to love you. Lydia started to cry. You have no right to talk about my body. And you do have the right to talk about mine? She shook her head as she wiped away her tears. It's not the same. Why not? She didn't answer. The friend who had intervened earlier looked at Lydia with a completely different expression. Until a few minutes ago, she had probably thought it was all a couple's argument. But now she was beginning to understand that there was much more to it. Another of our friends asked, Is all of that true? Lydia didn't answer, and her silence was enough. The friend next to her opened her eyes. You had all those things done? Lydia began to cry more heavily. I don't want to talk about this. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to talk about this either. I pointed to the table. I just wanted to say that someday I'd like to name a son Raul and a daughter Lydia. My voice no longer had the same angry tone. I was disappointed, and we ended up talking about whether my children would be attractive enough for you. No one said anything. Lydia covered her face with her hands. For the first time since that conversation had begun, she no longer seemed to be trying to prove she was right. She seemed ashamed, but what impacted me the most was seeing our friends' faces. Some had met Lydia recently and apparently knew nothing about her past. Now everyone understood that the person who was criticizing my appearance had gone through several procedures to modify her own. And still, no one was laughing. No one seemed to be enjoying the situation. There was just an awkward silence while Lydia cried, and I stood there trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. Lydia remained for a few seconds crying with her hands over her face. I was still standing in front of her. I no longer felt the same anger as a few minutes before. What had started as an argument had turned into something much more unpleasant than any of us could have imagined. I thought she would finally be quiet, but then she lifted her head. Her eyes were full of tears and an expression of rage I hadn't seen in her before. "You know what?" she said. "At least I could change how I looked." No one responded. Lydia dried her tears and pointed at me. "You can't change that your kids would turn out ugly." There was another silence. I don't know why, but at that moment I let out a nervous laugh. Not because I found what she was saying funny, but because the situation had reached such an absurd point that I no longer knew how to react. I let out a small chuckle. Lydia looked at me in disbelief. "What are you laughing at?" "At you." She froze. "If we're going to talk like that, then your kids could also end up with the same features you tried so hard to change," I replied. "They could inherit the nose you had before, your lips, the shape of your face. They could even have the same double chin you had." Lydia's eyes widened. "Don't you dare." "Why? You've been talking about genetics all night." "You have no right. You started it." She began to shake her head. "That's different." "No, it's not different." I picked up my phone from the table. Lydia immediately understood what I was doing. "Alejandro? No." I didn't answer. I searched for a few seconds among my photographs. I had many old pictures saved because during our relationship we had shared photographs, and although she had deleted practically all the old posts from her social media, I still had some. I finally found one. It was a picture of Lydia from a few years ago, before all the surgeries. It wasn't an embarrassing picture. She wasn't even making a strange face. It was simply a picture of her during an outing with some friends. But the change was evident. I showed the screen to the people closest to me. This was Lydia when I met her. She stood up immediately. "Don't do that." She tried to take my phone. I moved it away. "I'm not going to post it." "Delete that picture." "No." "Alejandro, delete it." The men at the table remained completely silent. They didn't know where to look. However, the women began to observe the photograph with surprise. One of them looked at Lydia and then back at the screen. "I knew you had some things done, but I didn't imagine it had been so many." Lydia froze. Another of the girls moved a little closer to see the photograph. "Oh my God." Lydia started to cry again. "I don't want them to see that." The girl looked at her. "I don't understand why it bothers you so much. It's a picture of you." Lydia didn't answer. Another friend spoke up. "The truth is, the change is very noticeable." I wasn't enjoying seeing her cry, but I also couldn't ignore the irony of the situation. All night, she had treated my appearance as if it were a feature that determined a person's worth. Now she was desperate for others not to see how she had been before. One of the girls looked at the photograph again and said, "Now I understand why you don't have any old pictures on your social media." Lydia replied through tears, "Because I didn't like them." "I understand that," the girl said. "But you can't talk about other people's genes as if surgeries change your genetics." Another of the women made an even more direct observation. "Exactly. You can modify your appearance, but you can't erase where your genes come from." Lydia fell silent. The first girl looked at the photograph again. "It's impressive how much a person can change with so many procedures." Another intervened. "And to think that a few minutes ago you were saying that Alejandro's children would be ugly." Lydia began to cry harder. "That's enough." But no one seemed willing to defend her. Not because they wanted to hurt her, but because she had brought the conversation to this point. The girl who had argued with her before shook her head. "Lydia, you were the first one to talk about the children's appearance. You can't get angry because they're responding to you now." Lydia looked at me. "You're an idiot." I remained silent. "I hate you," she continued. "I can't believe you did this. You said my children would be ugly. It was a joke. It didn't seem like a joke when you said you wanted to use another man's sperm." She pressed her lips together. "That doesn't mean you could humiliate me." I looked at her intently. "And what you did to me, what was that?" She didn't answer. One of the girls let out a sigh. I think Alejandro should find someone who really loves him. Lydia turned to her. Stay out of it. I'm getting into it because we've been listening to you say horrible things all night. The girl paused and added, It's still annoying. I even think it would be better if Alejandro were with someone else. At least someone who doesn't use the appearance of his children to humiliate him. Another girl tried to soften the comment. I'd say the best thing is for both of you to step away from this discussion. But no one was thinking about calming the situation anymore. Lydia felt cornered. She looked again at the photograph that was still on my phone. Delete it. I'm not going to share it with anyone. Delete it. No. She began to cry inconsolably. You're an idiot. Probably. We're over. Damn it. The phrase fell on the table. No one moved. I felt a strange calm. After everything that had happened, that relationship no longer seemed the same. I looked at her and simply replied, The truth hurts, doesn't it? Lydia stared at me for a few seconds. Then she took her purse. She didn't say anything else. She left the house practically running. The door closed behind her, and for several seconds no one spoke. I put my phone away. The photograph was once again saved among my files. One of the guys finally spoke. I think this got completely out of control. I nodded. Yes. The friend who had argued with Lydia earlier came over to me. I'm sorry. I didn't know she was like that. I didn't know she could go that far either. We were silent. The gathering had practically ended at that moment. No one felt like continuing to eat or talk, as if nothing had happened. Neither did I. I went home alone that night. Lydia didn't come back with me. For the next few days, I didn't receive any messages from her. There were no calls, no apologies, no conversation to try to resolve what had happened. She just disappeared. A few days later, she wrote to me to say she would come by for some of her things. I told her she could do it while I was out. When I returned, I found several boxes by the door. She had collected her clothes, some personal items, and other things she had left at my apartment during our relationship. We didn't speak face to face again. Our relationship practically ended that night. Over the following weeks, I understood that I probably hadn't lost a relationship that night. I had discovered something about the person I was with that I hadn't wanted to see before. Lydia had managed to change many things about her appearance, and I never had a problem with that. What I couldn't accept was that she used other people's appearance to feel superior, and much less that she talked about our future children as if they were a genetic project whose only goal was to have certain physical traits. I don't know what she thought after all of that. I also don't know if she ever truly regretted it. We never spoke again, but there's something I do know. That photograph she had tried to erase from everywhere remained saved on my phone. I didn't publish it. I never sent it to anyone. After all, it was a private photograph of a person with whom I had shared several years of my life. But every time I remember that night, I think of something quite simple. Lydia spent years trying to change her appearance because she wasn't satisfied with it, and I loved her both before and after those changes. I never thought I would have to remind her of that on the very day she decided to use my appearance to humiliate me. In the end, the photograph wasn't what ended our relationship. The photograph only made visible something that we all began to understand that night. The problem had never been how we looked. The problem was how we treated each other,